Why do some people find the writings of Schuon difficult? This is a question that has been asked by many people. I'll give you several reasons for that. First of all, certain things are difficult by nature. They're not meant for everyone. It's like ask the question, why are books of quantum mechanics difficult? It needs preparation. Once you study physics for several years, they open up to you and they're not that difficult if you're gifted for physics. When it comes to metaphysics, the modern world thinks that everybody who can read the New York Times or Washington Post should be able to read treatises on metaphysics because a kind of democratization of knowledge or something like that. We accept that in science there is no democratization of knowledge. Not everybody can read a book on quantum mechanics. But in metaphysics we think if not everybody can read it, is irrelevant or it's not true. But that's terrible because there are certain sciences which need preparation of the mind and sometimes of the soul, not only the mind. Modern science only the mind, but traditional sciences also of the soul, in order to understand. And we face that all the time, accept that when it comes to mathematics or physics or this or that. But we forget that metaphysics is the science of the supreme principle of God and the manifestation of that principle in various realms of existence. Being the supreme science, it requires of us what is supreme in our intelligence and in our being. And many people are not simply ready for it. There are two categories of people. People who simply do not have that intelligence, but they can still go to heaven through piety, through sacrifice, through love of God. God has put many different ways before us. Schuon himself wrote so much about this. The only path to God is not a path of knowledge, it's also a path of love, of service, the three karma yoga and bhakti yoga and jnana yoga of Hinduism and so forth. So they're not that type. They're not meant to read in metaphysical texts. So for them, the writing of Schuon is difficult, although they benefit from some of his advice. Somebody writes about love and so forth. When it comes to the heart of his message, they find it a closed book. The second are people who have the intellectual capability, but this capability has become atrophied by their education in a secular world, by the closing of the doors of the intellect to the divine empyrean, by simply opening its doors toward the basement of one's being rather than toward from the ceiling. And therefore, although they would be potentially capable, they find at first this to be very difficult. There is a kind of another form of exercise of the intelligence. It's as if you were a very muscular and strong person, and you were very good playing, let's say, some game like tennis. But the first time you did horseback riding was very difficult because you had to use other muscles, and you get pain in your legs. You have the capability. You're not a weakling who can do neither tennis nor horseback riding. You're an athlete, but you have not used those muscles in that way that you need for the second sport. Now, a lot of people are like that. People have read the books of Hegel and Kant and so forth, and they consider themselves to be philosophically trained, and they cannot penetrate the writings of Schuon. Those are people, as I said, whose intelligence, from our point of view, in a sense, has become atrophied or deviated. That is, the intelligence as we understand it. They're very clever thinkers, but their mind is closed within a particular finite space and cannot go beyond it. Now, in addition to all these factors, there's another reason. Traditional writings, which are inspired by God, protect themselves. In a sense, God sends a kind of invisible covering around these works, like we have an iconography of angels or something like that in different religions. And it's not possible to penetrate through that covering into the text, into that meaning, except with the grace of God and a certain spiritual preparation. I've seen many a person, not completely ungifted for spiritual matters, whom I've given one of the books of Schuon to read, and doesn't speak to them at all. They don't understand it, they put it aside, and then 10 years later they come back to it and say, oh my God, what a wonderful book, I didn't realize what was there, I just couldn't get to it. This kind of thing I've seen many, many times in my life. Having said all of these things, I have to add the following point. Schuon's mother tongue was German. Because of what happened in the First World War and the transfer of certain provinces to France and all of the things that you know, he was educated also in French. And then, of course, from Mulhouse, he came to Paris, and he became very good in French. But he thought in German. He thought in German. Later, he learned Arabic, he went to Algeria, but his first language remained German. When he came back to the West, and well, really after the Second World War, when he began to write his important books, he no longer wrote in German. And in fact, the 2 volumes of German poetry, Sulamit and the Book of Night and the Nacht und Tag, and also the Leitgedanken, were not very much available. He never was willing to have them translated. In fact, there's a new edition of Leitgedanken in German, which has also quotation from me of the importance of this book. But I once asked him, I said, will you allow us to bring this out in English? He said no. He decided to make the French language the main language of his intellectual discourse, I think for several reasons. Part of it because of the writings of Guénon. There's no doubt about that. Is in French, there was already this corpus of writing dealing with metaphysics and things which were very close to the perspective of Friedrich Schuon, whereas in German there was not. And secondly, I think also perhaps, I would not say political in the ordinary sense, but intellectual political reason. That is, this was after the Second World War, the Germans had been defeated, the German language itself was under stress from English, and Sheikh did not know enough English to write in English at that time. In fact, he refused to do so to the end of his life, except for the few poems. And so he chose French. And his first work in French is a very Germanic French. The genius of French and German are very different. German has these long sentences that go on and on. It's like Arabic. The whole book is really could be one sentence. You go on from page to page, and has a architectonic and vertical structure in it, which is quite amazing. It's much more archaic than French. French has the lucidity of Cartesian logic. The language is very lucid, very precise. And he began to write in French. Of course, soon he became a wonderful writer in French. But there was always something of that Germanic character in his prose. And that is why, especially the sentence structure. Finally, there's one last point. How many people you have in the world? The whole globe?
6 billion.
All right. Among these 6 billion, how many know serious material about even their own language? Very few. How many about several languages, several religions, excuse me, about their own religion? Very few, not many, but several religions, very, very few. And how many among those know a lot about several religions, at the same time have a metaphysical bent of mind, can understand metaphysics? And then how many also know the historical unfolding of various religions? When you put all these factors together, there remain very few people. I think that in the future, the writings of Schuon will have to be complemented to a large extent by either commentaries or other works written to open up the mind in order to better understand his writings.